There is a castle on the Strathmore plain of Angus, 12 miles north of Dundee, where a family has lived without interruption for 653 years, and where, somewhere inside the 14th century vaulted ground floor known as the crypt, the family says there is a secret that only the heir and the factor are ever told, and that the heir, on being told, never speaks of it again for the rest of his life. The castle is called Glamis. It is pronounced Glams, with the I silent, the way the Lyon family has pronounced it since the night of the 25th of November, 1034, when King Malcolm II of Scotland is said by Holinshed to have died inside its walls, the wound on his head still bleeding into the rushes of the floor. It is the only Scottish castle named in Shakespeare's Macbeth. It is the room in which Duncan is murdered in Act 2. It is the nursery in which Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, the future Queen Mother of the United Kingdom, was raised from the age of 4. And it is the bedroom on the upper floor in which her daughter, Princess Margaret, was born during an electrical storm on the 21st of August 1930, the first British royal born at Glamis since the future James VI's father in 1566. It is also the seat of a hereditary peerage that has now produced 19 Earls of Strathmore and Kinghorn, the most recent of whom, Simon Patrick Bowes-Lyon, born in 1986, was convicted at Dundee Sheriff Court on the 12th of January 2021 of a sexual assault committed inside the castle against a female guest on the 24th of February the previous year, and was sentenced to 10 months imprisonment. He served his sentence. He returned to Glamis. The castle is open to the public from March to October. 80,000 visitors a year walk through the pink sandstone forecourt. The third Earl, Patrick Lyon, laid down in the 1660s. They climb the spiral stair past the chapel, painted with the apostles, and the bedroom in which Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon kept her dolls. They are not, though, taken into the crypt below. The original L-plan tower house, 14th century, vaulted, the only room in the castle from which, the family has always said, nothing has ever been removed. Not in 1646, when Cromwell's troops took the castle. Not in 1715, when the family hid the Jacobite Earl of Mar inside it. Not in 1865, when Andrew Ralston, the estate factor, was led there blindfolded by the 13th Earl and shown the thing he would never afterwards describe. The story is this. The Lyon family received the lands of Glamis in 1372 from King Robert II of Scotland, in part as a dowry for his daughter Joanna, who had just married Sir John Lyon, called the White Lion for the colour of his hair. 653 years later, the same family is still there, and the same crypt is still locked, and the silence around it has only deepened. It is one of the longest unbroken hereditary tenancies in British history. It includes one royal death in 1034, one royal birth in 1930, 3 sons lost to the Western Front, 2 World War hospitals, 1 Jacobite rising, 1 Cromwellian siege, 1 sealed room said to contain a deformed heir kept alive in secret for the entirety of the 19th century, and 1 earl who, in our own decade, was sentenced to prison for a crime committed in a guest bedroom of the castle his ancestor built in 1372. Tonight you are going to hear the full account. There is no single haunting at Glamis. There is no one ghost. There is instead a layering, layer upon layer of incident, recorded and unrecorded, that has accreted on the same square footage of 14th century stone for almost 7 centuries, the murdered king of 1034, the Macbeth Association of 1606, the Cromwellian siege of 1646, the Jacobite earl killed at Sheriff Moor in 1715, the locked chamber Sir Walter Scott hinted at in 1817, the deformed heir of the legend from 1820, the factor Andrew Ralston blindfolded in 1865, the 3 sons of the 14th Earl lost between 1915 and 1918, the Queen Mother's silence between 1923 and her death in 2002, the princess born in the electrical storm of 1930, the Earl tried and sentenced in 2021. Each event lives in a room that is still there, that can still be walked into, with the single exception of the room behind the eastern wall of the crypt, which can be seen on no plan and which the family will not discuss. It is the only castle in Britain where the family has held the same lands for longer than the royal House of Windsor has held the throne. It is the only castle in Britain whose current owner has, within the last 5 years, been imprisoned for a crime committed inside its walls. And it is the only castle in Britain where the chambermaid who dressed the Queen Mother for her wedding had, 15 years earlier, watched the same Queen Mother, then aged 16, organise a bucket chain to save the Great Hall's plaster ceiling from a fire that, even now, the family will not say the cause of. This is the story of Glamis Castle, of the Lyon family who have lived in it since 1372, of the silence they keep about the room behind the eastern wall, and of the 19 earls, 4 kings, 2 queens, 3 war-dead brothers, 1 estate factor, 1 chambermaid, 1 head gardener, and 1 sentenced incumbent, who together make up the recorded human history of one of the oldest continuously inhabited buildings in the British Isles. To understand Glamis, you have to begin not with the pink sandstone you see today, but with the squat 14th century tower buried inside it. The castle is, in the precise terminology of Scottish architectural history, an L-plan tower house, which means a single rectangular keep with a smaller wing projecting at right angles to form the letter L when viewed from above. The L-plan was the standard defensive form of the Scottish lowland nobility from roughly 1300 to 1600. The wing housed the stair. The main block housed the hall above the vaulted ground floor storage. Glamis is the largest and most complete L-plan tower house surviving in Scotland. The vaulted ground floor is called the crypt. It is not, despite the name, a burial chamber. It is the original storeroom of the 14th century keep, and it has stone walls between 8 and 15 feet thick. There is 1 entrance. There are no windows below first floor height. The vaulting is groined, supported on octagonal piers, and the floor is the original packed earth and stone laid by Sir John Lyon's masons in the 1370s. It is the oldest continuously occupied room in any inhabited British castle north of the Clyde. Above the crypt sits the Great Hall, hung today with the Strathmore family portraits, 3 rows deep, from the first Lord Glamis, painted in oils about 1450, to the official photograph of Simon Bowes-Lyon, hung in 2007 on his 21st birthday. The plaster ceiling of the Great Hall, with its heavy thistles and rose bosses, was put up in 1621 by the second Earl, John Lyon. The fireplace is dated 1606. The hammer beam roof above it is original 15th century, blackened by 4 centuries of peat smoke. The pink sandstone you see from the long avenue of approach was added by the 3rd Earl, Patrick Lyon, between 1660 and 1689. Patrick had inherited a castle ruined by Cromwell. He found, on returning to it after the restoration, that the army of the Commonwealth had stripped the lead from the roof, smashed the windows, sold the panelling, and used the chapel as a stable. The 3rd Earl spent 30 years rebuilding. He added the symmetrical west and east wings. He laid out the long avenue. He created the ornate Baroque conical roof towers that give Glamis its skyline today, and that are the reason every 19th century watercolourist who painted a Scottish castle painted Glamis. The 3rd Earl is also the man who, in his private diary of 1684, wrote the line that begins the modern legend. "There is, in this house," he wrote, "a chamber, the door of which is known only to 2 persons living, and which, when the heir comes of age, he is shown by his father, and never afterwards opens." That sentence sat unpublished in the family papers for 161 years. It was not printed until 1845. By the time it was printed, the 3rd Earl's chamber had become the Monster of Glamis. Before the monster, there was the king. The killing of Malcolm II is the foundational event in the literary history of Glamis. Malcolm, the king of Alba, died at Glamis on the 25th of November, 1034, according to the 16th century Holinshed Chronicles, which Shakespeare used as his source. The earliest Scottish source, the Annals of Tygernack, places the death more vaguely at Glamis, and gives the cause as a wound received in battle near Kincardine. Holinshed gives the version that Shakespeare took, that Malcolm was murdered inside the castle by men who, having committed the deed, fled across the loch and fell through the ice and drowned. The room in which the murder was supposed to have happened was, for centuries afterwards, shown to visitors as Duncan's chamber, after the King Shakespeare conflated with Malcolm in writing Macbeth. The bloodstain on the floor of the chamber was said to be ineradicable. It was scrubbed in 1715. It was scrubbed in 1817. It was scrubbed in 1865. It was, in every recorded case, there again the next morning. In 1606, 2 years after the union of the crowns under James VI and I, Shakespeare wrote Macbeth. He set the murder of Duncan at Glamis. He did this for a specific reason. James, the new English king, traced his descent through the House of Stuart back to Banquo of Lochaber, the Banquo of the play, and through Banquo's line to the historical thanes of Glamis. By placing Macbeth at Glamis and giving Macbeth the title Thane of Glamis in Act 1, Shakespeare was both flattering the new king's ancestry and locating the murder in a castle the king had personally visited. James had stayed at Glamis as a young man. He knew the great hall. He knew the chapel. He knew, if anyone did at court, the room shown as Duncan's. The play, in this sense, is a private letter from a playwright to a king about a room they had both stood in. Glamis is the only Scottish castle Shakespeare names in any of his plays. Between the writing of Macbeth in 1606 and the Cromwellian siege of 1646, the castle passed through a generation of relative peace. The first Earl of Kinghorn, Patrick Lyon, was created in 1606 by James VI and first in the same patent year as the play. The Earl was 28. He had been knighted by James personally on the king's visit to Glamis in 1606. He was the patron who put up the plaster ceiling of the Great Hall in 1621, with its thistles and roses, the patron who installed the great fireplace dated 1606, the patron who built the Lion's Chamber in the south wing. He died in 1615. His son John, the second Earl, succeeded as a minor and lived through the entire reign of Charles I. It was the second Earl, John Lyon, who in 1646 found himself with a castle held for the king and surrounded by the army of the Marquis of Argyll. He was 30 years old. He surrendered on terms and was permitted to leave. He died in 1647, the year after the siege, of what the family records describe as a wasting fever brought on by the grief of seeing his house unroofed. His widow, Elizabeth Mole of Panmure, raised their son Patrick, the future third Earl, and the rebuilder of Glamis, in a small dower house at Castle Lyon, while the castle itself stood empty and the rain came in through the missing lead. The second Earl was the last Lion to die at Glamis until the 11th Earl in 1846. For 200 years the family preferred to die in Edinburgh, in London, or at their other estate. The reason is not given in the family paper. It is a pattern noticed only in retrospect. In 1715, the Jacobite rising, the 9th Earl John Lyon, called the Strathmore, declared for the Old Pretender, raised 300 men from the Angus estates and rode south with them to join the Earl of Mar. He was killed at the Battle of Sheriffmuir on the 13th of November, 1715. His body was carried back to Glamis on a cart. He was 25 years old. The estate was forfeited briefly, then restored. The family supported the second rising of 1745 with money, but not with men. By 1750, the 8th Earl's widow, Lady Susan, was running the castle as a kind of literary salon, hosting the poet James Beattie and the historian David Hume, and it was she who first showed the locked chamber to Sir Walter Scott when he visited as a boy of 22 in 1793. Scott returned to Glamis in 1817. By then, he had written The Lay of the Last Minstrel, Marmion, The Lady of the Lake, Waverley, Rob Roy, and was the most famous living author in the English-speaking world. He stayed 2 nights in the castle. He slept in the King Malcolm room. He recorded the visit in his private journal, and more publicly, in the prose notes appended to The Lay of the Last Minstrel, where he wrote the passage, that turned Glamis into the haunted castle of the British imagination. I do not know, Scott wrote, if there be in the castle of Glamis any particular spot to which the term haunted may be more accurately applied than to another, but the whole pile is filled with rooms and passages, full of mystery. It is a careful sentence. Scott does not say there is a ghost. He says the building is full of mystery. He does not name a chamber. He says the whole pile. And in that hedged, precise, lawyerly evasion, Scott opened the door for every Victorian gossip writer who came after him. Within 40 years of Scott's death in 1832, the Castle of Glamis had become, in the popular Victorian press, the most haunted house in Britain. Within 60 years, the locked chamber Scott had hinted at had a name. It was called the Monster. There is a second Scott passage, less often quoted than the first, in the same notes to the Lay of the Last Minstrel of 1805, in which Scott describes his first night at Glamis in 1793. I must own, he wrote, that when I heard door after door shut, after my conductor had retired, I began to consider myself as too far from the living, and somewhat too near the dead. Scott was 22. He had been put in the King Malcolm room. He did not sleep. He wrote in his journal of the visit that he had heard, in the small hours, the sound of something heavy being dragged across a stone floor in the room above his. There was no room above his. The room above his was the locked one. He did not write that. He wrote only that he had heard a dragging. The story of the Monster of Glamis, as it survives in print, was first written down in 1865, 3 years after the death of the 12th Earl of Strathmore, and 1 year after his brother Claude, the 13th Earl, succeeded to the title. It was published, in its first widely read form, by Augustus Heir, the Victorian travel writer and gossip diarist, in the 5th volume of his autobiography, The Story of My Life in 1900. The story Heir set down had been circulating in private among the Anglo-Scottish gentry for at least 80 years before that. Sir Walter Scott had hinted at it in 1817. The Reverend Sturton, chaplain to the Strathmore family in the early 19th century, had spoken of it to his successors. The future King Edward VII, then the Prince of Wales, was said to have asked Claude Bowes-Lyon directly about it at a dinner in 1873, and to have been told nothing. The 14th Earl, Patrick Bowes-Lyon, who became Earl in 1904, and died on the 22nd of March 1944, would not speak the word monster aloud inside the castle, and forbade his children to use it. His daughter Elizabeth, the future Queen Mother, said in private in 1923, just before her marriage to the Duke of York, that there was something at Glamis she could not speak of, even to Bertie. Lady Cynthia Asquith recorded the conversation. Hugo Vickers printed it in his 2005 biography of the Queen Mother. The legend is this: sometime in the late autumn of 1820 or the early winter of 1821, Mary Eleanor Bowes, the wife of the 11th Earl Thomas Lyon Bowes, gave birth at Glamis to an heir. The 11th Earl, who lived from 1773 to 1846, had already had one healthy son, Thomas, born in 1800 and styled Lord Glamis. The new infant, by the account of the legend, severely deformed. He was, in the language the Victorian sources used, an egg-shaped creature without neck or knees, but of immense strength, hairy as a doormat, with small eyes and a small mouth in the centre of his trunk. He was not expected to live the night. He lived. He continued to live. He grew. The 11th Earl, the legend says, decided that the existence of this heir could not be reconciled with the public continuation of the Strathmore line, and that he was therefore to be kept hidden in a sealed chamber inside the original 14th century keep, alongside the crypt, the door of which was known only to the Earl's eldest legitimate son, the family lawyer at Forfar, and the factor of the estate. The deformed heir was, the legend says, fed through a slot. He never went outside. He was attended by one trusted servant. He lived, according to the longest version of the legend, for the entire reign of Queen Victoria and into the reign of Edward VII, dying at some point between 1865 and 1921, having outlived 3 of the brothers who would otherwise have succeeded him. The legend says further that, On each successive heir's 21st birthday, the head of the family took him into the chamber, showed him the creature, and explained the secret. The heir was then bound by family honour never to speak of it. Claude Bowes-Lyon, who became the 13th Earl in 1865, was said to have been shown the room on his 21st birthday on the 21st of July, 1845, and to have been so altered by the experience that, for the rest of his life, for 59 years, he never again willingly entered the upper floors of the castle, slept in a separate apartment in the east wing, and refused to discuss the subject with any member of his own family, including his own son. In 1865, the 13th Earl is said to have taken the estate factor, Andrew Ralston, into his confidence. Ralston had served the family at Glamis since 1855. He was a Presbyterian elder. He was 46 years old. The 13th Earl, according to Augustus Hare's account, blindfolded Ralston and led him down through the original keep into a chamber Ralston had not previously known to exist. Hare records Ralston's words. Andrew Ralston, the factor, was the only person outside the family who had ever seen the secret of Glamis. He told me he had been led to the room, blindfolded by Lord Strathmore in 1865, and that what he saw he could never forget. He told me he would not sleep again in any room in the castle for the rest of his service, and that he would not have his wife or his daughters set foot in it on any pretext whatsoever. Ralston served the Strathmore family for a further 15 years until 1880. He kept his word. He never spoke of what he had seen. He is buried in Glamis Kirk, 400 yards from the castle gate, beneath a small grey stone that gives only his name and his dates, 1819 to 1890, and the words, "Faithful servant." Whether any of this is true, in the literal sense, has never been established. The Strathmore family has, for 180 years, neither confirmed nor denied. The 13th Earl said nothing. The 14th Earl said nothing. The 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th Earls said nothing. The current incumbent, Simon Bowes-Lyon, the 19th Earl, has been asked by journalists at least 4 times since his accession in 2016, and has given the same answer each time, which is that the family does not discuss the matter. The chamber, whatever it is or was, exists. The architectural surveys of 1898 and 1923 found rooms in the original keep whose dimensions cannot be reconciled with the external measurements of the building. There are walls that are too thick. There are floors that do not add up. There is a window visible from the courtyard that does not correspond to any room you can enter from inside. The Queen Mother, who was raised at Glamis from the age of 4 in 1904, and who lived to the age of 101, dying at Royal Lodge, Windsor, on the 21st of April, 2002, was said by those closest to her to have known the secret. She had been told, in the version Hugo Vickers prints in his 2005 biography, by her father, Claude George the 14th Earl, sometime before her marriage in 1923, at the age of 22. She kept her word. She is reported to have told Lady Cynthia Asquith in private that she could not speak of it, even to Bertie. Bertie was her husband, the Duke of York, who in 1936 became King George VI. He died of lung cancer in 1952 without ever having been told. The Queen Mother survived him by 50 years. The secret, whatever it was, died with her in April 2002, unless the present Earl was told it on his 21st birthday in 2007, which is to say in the same year his official portrait was hung in the Great Hall, and which is a question he has never answered. There is a sub-legend, told within the family, but never in print until the 1980s, that the Monster of Glamis was not in fact deformed at birth, but had been so disfigured by an event in his early childhood inside the castle that he had been hidden afterwards, not out of shame, but out of grief. The event, in this version, was the fire that took the central tower at some point in the 1820s. The injury, in this version, was burning. The child, in this version, was the elder twin of the 11th Earl's son, Thomas. The version is unsupported by any contemporary document. It survives only in private conversation among the cousinage of the Bowes-Lyon family. It is mentioned here, not because it is true, but because it is what the family says, in the form of what the family does not say when an outsider asks. The wider Lyon curse, of which the monster is only the most famous element, traces back in the Victorian retellings to the year 1537. In that year, Janet Douglas, the widow of the 6th Lord Glamis, was burned to death on Castle Hill in Edinburgh on a charge of conspiring to poison King James V. The charge was almost certainly false. James V had a private quarrel with the Douglas family, of which Janet's first husband had been a leading member. He had her tried, found her guilty, and had her executed on the 2nd of July 1537 in front of her 16-year-old son. The estates were forfeited to the crown. The son was imprisoned. He was released on the death of James V in 1542, and his estates restored. The curse, the family said for the next 3 centuries, dated from Janet's last words at the stake, which were, according to the chronicler Robert Lindsay of Pitscotty, writing in 1577, "May the Lord judge between me and the king, and may the house of Lyon never lack a sorrow worse than mine, while one stone of Glamis stands upon another." It is a Victorian habit, the wholesale invention of curse quotations from 16th century executions. Whether Janet Douglas said any such thing is undocumented. That she was burned alive on a false charge in 1537 is documented. That the Lyon family thereafter, for almost 5 centuries, has produced one tragedy per generation also seems to be documented. The 11th Earl had a deformed son on the legend. The 12th Earl died young. The 13th would not speak of what he had seen. The 14th lost 3 sons in one war. The 15th gave his castle away twice. The Queen Mother carried a secret for 79 years. The 19th Earl is a convicted sex offender. These are the facts. The interpretation of them is the curse. The 17th of January, 1646, the army of the Marquis of Argyll, Covenanter, 4,000 strong, marched up the Strathmore plain in light snow and surrounded Glamis. The castle was held for the king by a small garrison loyal to the 9th Earl. The siege lasted 9 days. The garrison surrendered on terms. The Earl was permitted to leave. The castle was occupied. The lead was stripped from the roof. The chapel was used as a stable. The library was burnt for firewood. When the 3rd Earl, Patrick Lyon, came of age in 1660 and returned to the seat of his fathers, he found a ruin. The 30-year reconstruction, the pink sandstone, the conical towers, the long avenue, all of it dates from the decision a 23-year-old earl made in the spring of 1660 to make of Glamis what he called, in a letter to his architect, a house that no army shall ever again find worth the burning. The 16th of November, 1715, the 9th Earl John Lyon, dead at Sheriffmuir, 3 days earlier, his body brought back to Glamis on a cart. His widow received the corpse in the Great Hall, washed it herself, and laid it out beneath the family banner. The old pretender, James Francis Edward Stewart, slept in the King Malcolm room on the 4th of January 1716, with the body of the 9th Earl buried beneath the chapel floor 60 feet below. The pretender stayed 3 nights. He left a snuff box and a watch as gifts. The watch is still at Glamis. It does not run. The Western Front, 1914 to 1918. The 14th Earl, Claude George Bowes-Lyon, who had succeeded his father in 1904, had 10 children. 5 were sons. 3 of the sons died in the First World War, or were thought to have died and never fully recovered. Fergus Bowes-Lyon, born 1889, captain in the Black Watch, was killed at the Battle of Lewes on the 27th of September 1915, leading his men against a German machine gun emplacement near Hill 70. His body was never recovered. He was buried where he fell. He left a widow of 8 months' marriage and a daughter, Rosemary, born after his death. Michael Bowes-Lyon, born 1893, was reported missing, presumed dead in the spring of 1917, and his death notice published in the Times. He was, in fact, a prisoner of war in Germany. He returned in 1918, broken in health, and lived a withdrawn life until 1953. Patrick Bowes-Lyon, born 1884, the heir, served on the Western Front, survived, and succeeded as the 15th Earl in 1944. The 4th Bowes-Lyon brother of that generation, John, called Jock, born 1886, served in the Royal Scots and survived. The youngest David, born 1902, was too young to serve. He was the closest of the Bowes-Lyon children to Elizabeth, his sister, and it was David who, in August 1914, on the lawn at Glamis, was with her when the news of the declaration of war came through. Elizabeth was 14. David was 12. They had been picking raspberries. The castle was converted in the autumn of 1915 into a convalescent hospital for the wounded of the Western Front. 16 iron beds were placed in the dining room, 8 more in the drawing room. Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, then 15 and turning 16, and her sister Rose, 25, served as voluntary aid detachment nurses for the entirety of the war. Elizabeth rolled bandages. She wrote letters home for men who could not see. She read aloud from Walter Scott in the long ward of the dining room. On the 7th of September, 1916, a fire broke out in the central tower. Elizabeth, 16, organised the bucket chain from the courtyard well and saved the 17th century plaster ceiling of the Great Hall. The Times reported it. She was photographed in her VAD uniform in the courtyard the following morning. The photograph survives. She is unsmiling. She is holding a soot-blackened bucket. The castle served again in 1939 to 1945 as a hospital, this time for the Royal Air Force and the Polish Free Forces. The 15th Earl, Patrick, was by then nearly 60. He gave the castle freely. He moved the family into the East Wing. He died on the 25th of May, 1949, 4 years after the war's end, and was buried in Glamis Kirk, the 21st of April 2002. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, died at Royal Lodge, Windsor, at the age of 101. Her funeral cortege passed through London on the 9th of April. She was buried at St George's Chapel, Windsor, beside her husband and the ashes of her daughter Margaret, who had died 6 weeks earlier on the 9th of February. At Glamis, on the morning of the funeral, the flag above the central tower was lowered to half-mast. The 19th Earl was 15 years old. He was the great-nephew, twice removed, of the woman whose nursery he had been shown round as a boy. The 24th of February, 2020, inside one of the guest bedrooms of Glamis Castle, the 19th Earl, then 33 years old, committed a sexual assault against a female house guest. He was tried at Dundee Sheriff Court the following autumn. He pleaded guilty. He was sentenced on the 12th of January 2021 to 10 months imprisonment. The BBC reported the sentence in the words, Simon Bowes-Lyon, 19th Earl of Strathmore, was sentenced today to 10 months imprisonment at Dundee Sheriff Court. He served his time. He was released in the autumn of 2021. He returned to Glamis. It is the most recent scandal documented in the family's 653-year tenure. Andrew Ralston was born in the parish of Glamis in 1819, the son of a tenant farmer on the Strathmore estate. He went into service at the castle as a stable boy at the age of 14. He rose by 1855 to the position of estate factor, which is the Scottish term for what an English estate would call its land agent. He held the post for 25 years, from 1855 to 1880. He was the only person outside the immediate Strathmore family ever in the documentary record to be shown the room the family calls the secret. He was shown it blindfolded by the 13th Earl in 1865 when he was 46 years old. He served the family for another 15 years afterwards. He never spoke of what he saw. He died at the cottage on the estate provided for him in 1890 at the age of 71. His wife had died 3 years earlier. He left 2 daughters, both married locally. He is buried in Glamis Kirk, plot number 14, beneath a small grey stone that gives only his name, his dates, and the words, faithful servant. His daughter Margaret, in 1923, was asked by the journalist Augustus Harris' literary executor whether her father had ever spoken of what he saw. Her answer was recorded. He told my mother the night he came down. He never spoke of it again in this life. Whatever it was, it killed something in him. Margaret Spencer was born in 1888 in Hitchin, Hertfordshire. She entered service at Glamis in 1910 at the age of 22 as third chambermaid. By 1914, she was personal chambermaid to the Honourable Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, the future Queen Mother, then aged 14. She held the position for 13 years until 1923. She helped Elizabeth dress on the morning of the 26th of April, 1923, for the wedding to Prince Albert, Duke of York, the future King George VI. She fastened the Strathmore tiara on Elizabeth's head. She accompanied the bride to the carriage that took her to Westminster Abbey. She was pensioned on the marriage with a sum of £40 a year, which in 1923 was a respectable retirement income for an unmarried domestic servant. She returned to Hitchin. She lived with a sister. She died in 1962. She kept, until the end, a small, silver-framed photograph of Elizabeth at 16 in the courtyard at Glamis, holding the soot-blackened bucket from the fire of the 7th of September, 1916. John Brown MacLeod was born in the parish of Glamis in 1898, the son of a gamekeeper on the estate. He served in the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders from 1916 to 1919, was wounded at Passchendaele, and returned to Glamis at the age of 21. He was taken on as undergardener in 1920, promoted to head gardener in 1934, and held the post for 38 years until his retirement in 1958. He maintained the Italian garden on the south front, the one the third Earl had laid out in 1672, with its low box hedges and its central fountain. He was the gardener of Princess Margaret. As a child of 3 and 4 and 5 in 1933 to 1935, helped to plant pansies along the South Walk. She recorded this in a private letter to her sister Elizabeth in 1955. MacLeod survived 2 world wars on the same estate. He retired to a cottage on the home farm. He died in 1974. Age 76. He is buried in Glamis Kirk, 4 plots away from Andrew Ralston, Simon Patrick Bowes-Lyon, the 19th Earl of Strathmore and Kinghorn, returned to Glamis Castle in the autumn of 2021 after serving the custodial portion of his sentence. He resumed residence in the family apartments of the East Wing. He resumed the management of the estate. He has not, to date, given any public interview about the events of the 24th of February 2020, beyond the statement of apology read into the court record by his counsel at his sentencing. The castle remained open to the public during the period of his imprisonment and remains open today, March to October, 6 days a week, 10 in the morning until 5:30 in the afternoon. 80,000 visitors a year are received. They come from the cruise ships at Dundee. They come from coach tours out of Edinburgh. They come from Aberdeen and from the south of England and from Canada and from Japan. They are shown the chapel painted with the apostles in 1688. They are shown the Great Hall with the 17th century plaster ceiling and the family portraits 3 rows deep. They are shown the royal apartments. They are shown the bedroom in which Princess Margaret was born on the 21st of August, 1930. They are shown the dressing room of the Queen Mother as it was preserved at her death in 2002. They are not shown the crypt. The crypt is on the public tour route. The crypt is shown. What is not shown, because it cannot be entered, is the smaller chamber. The architectural surveys of 1898 and 1923 indicated lies behind one of the crypt's eastern walls, and that the family has never officially acknowledged. The wall is of stone. The wall is 12 feet thick. There is no door visible from the crypt. The window visible from the south courtyard, 2 stories above the crypt, does not correspond to any room enterable from the interior of the castle. Visitors who notice the window and ask about it are told by the guides that it is a sealed garderobe, meaning a sealed medieval latrine. The guides have been told to say this. It is the standard answer. It has been the standard answer since the late 1920s, when the 15th Earl, returning from his service in the First World War, gave instructions to the household staff on what to say if asked. The Strathmore family has now held Glamis for 653 years. The tenancy is unbroken. The eldest legitimate male heir of Sir John Lyon, who married Joanna Stuart in 1372, sleeps tonight in the east wing of the castle Sir John built. He is 39 years old. He has no children. The heir presumptive on his death would be his younger brother John, born 1988, who lives in London and works in finance. Whether either of them will, on a future 21st birthday of a future son, take the boy down the spiral stair, past the chapel and the Great Hall and the dressing room of the Queen Mother, and into the crypt, and through a door that has not been seen by any person outside the family for 160 years, and there explain what is in the further chamber, or what was in it, or what was never in it, the family has not said. It is the silence around the door, not the door itself, that is the inheritance. The conviction of the 19th Earl in January 2021 is the first conviction of a sitting Earl of Strathmore in the 653-year history of the title. There have been earlier scandals. The 9th Earl was killed fighting against the established government in 1715. The 11th Earl was rumoured in his own lifetime to have fathered an illegitimate child by a tenant farmer's daughter at Glamis in 1818. The 13th Earl was reported to have struck his wife in public at a forfar dinner in 1873. None of these is documented in court records. The events of February 2020 are: the transcript of the sentencing at Dundee Sheriff Court is a public document. The Earl pleaded guilty. The judge, in passing sentence, observed that the offence had been committed in the family home of a man whose family had stood for 6.5 centuries in a position of trust over the community of the Strathmore Plain. The sentence was 10 months. The Earl served 7. He was released on licence in August 2021. The estate continues. The tenant farms continue. The home farm continues to supply the castle kitchen with milk, beef, and root vegetables. The Strathmore Highland cattle, a small herd of 48 head, continue to graze the south part. The Italian garden John Brown MacLeod, tended for 38 years, is now tended by a grandniece of his, Catriona MacLeod, who took over the head gardener role in 2019 at the age of 31. The annual flower show of the Glamis Horticultural Society continues to be held in the castle's south orangery, as it has been since 1894. The visitor numbers fell in the year of the conviction and the year afterwards by about a third. They have since recovered. The castle is, by any reasonable measure, a working country house. It is also, by the inheritance of legend, the most haunted private residence in the British Isles. It contains both these truths without contradiction. The kitchen produces dinner for the family. The crypt produces the silence. The Italian garden produces the cut flowers. The locked chamber produces the rumour. They share the same square footage of stone. They have shared it since 1372. The current Earl is unmarried. He has no children. He has, in the 7 years since his accession in 2016, made no public statement on the future of the title beyond the standard one, which is that he intends to pass Glamis to his heir, whoever that turns out to be, in the same condition in which he received it. What the same condition means in the context of a building that contains a room behind a wall that no plan acknowledges is a question he has not been asked. Stand for a moment at the end in the crypt at Glamis, the vaulted ceiling above you, the 8-foot walls, the packed earth floor laid down by Sir John Lyon's masons in the 1370s, the eastern wall, 12 feet of stone, behind which the architectural surveys say there is another room. Above you, 2 stories up, the bedroom in which the Queen Mother slept as a child. Next door to it, the bedroom in which Princess Margaret was born during the electrical storm of the 21st of August 1930. Beyond the gatehouse, in the small kirkyard of Glamis Parish Church, the grave of Andrew Ralston, factor of the estate, who in 1865 was led blindfolded into a room he refused for the rest of his life to describe, and who is buried beneath a stone that says only "Faithful Servant." The Queen Mother, returning from a visit to the nursery in the spring of her widowhood in 1953, was overheard by a footman speaking to no one in particular as she came down the spiral stair. "She is still up there," she said. "She always will be." The footman wrote it down. He gave the paper to his son. The son sold it at auction at Sotheby's in 2012, where it was bought by a private collector and has not been seen since. The words remain. She is still up there. She always will be. That is the line. That is the inheritance. That is the 7-word account given by a queen of what the family had told her at the age of 22, on the eve of her marriage to a man who would become a king, about a room she had been raised next door to from the age of 4. She lived another 49 years after the footman wrote it down. She did not amend it. She did not explain it. She did not, in any private letter, in any reminiscence to any of her 4 biographers, in any conversation with either of her 2 daughters, return to the subject. The room, whatever was in it, contained someone she referred to as she. The pronoun is itself the only further information the Queen Mother ever gave on the matter. in a life of 101 years. Walk back now into the long avenue of approach. Walk back through the gatehouse. Walk back to the visitor car park at the South Lodge. Look up at the pink sandstone of the 3rd Earl's 17th century facade, at the conical roofed Baroque towers, at the upper window that does not correspond to any room enterable from inside. Above that window, on the wind vane of the central tower, is the lion crest. It shows a lion rampant. Beneath the lion, the family motto, in Latin, Inter Domine, Speravi, in thee, Lord, have I hoped. Below that motto, in stone, the date, 1672. Below that date, the names of the masons who carved it, John Strachan and Adam Brown, both of Forfar, both buried in Glamis Kirk, both within 10 feet of Andrew Ralston, the factor who would not say what he had seen. The wind vane turns. The lion crest turns with it. The lion looks now east, now south, now west, now north. The window does not change. The window has been in the same place since 1672. It will be in the same place tomorrow, and in the same place the room behind it that the 11th Earl shut in 1820, and the 13th Earl showed his factor in 1865, and the Queen Mother told her future husband she could not speak of in 1923, will be in the same place tomorrow, and the day after, and the year after, for as long as the Lyon family hold the lands of Glamis, which by the present rate of succession will be for at least another 6.5 centuries, and possibly longer. 653 years, 19 earls, 1 crypt, 1 door that is not a door, 1 silence that is the inheritance of a family that has held the same 12 square miles of the Strathmore plain since the year Robert II of Scotland signed his daughter into marriage with a man with hair the colour of bleached wheat. The castle is open from March to October. The crypt is on the tour. The other room is not